All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the AFCOM Southern California chapter, second quarter 2022 educational series webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing the U.S. Southwestern United States U.S. colocation market trends, hybrid models of operation, low latency services, Southern California-based users. We brought in a number of panelists from the top data center providers here in the West. You're used to seeing a number of the different co-location providers that we've worked with here in Southern California. They're still part of the equation. What we're doing is this on this session is bringing in some of those data center operators that operate outside of California that are still providing low latency service to users inside California. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to David Sipes, our chapter president, for some few introductory remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today's call. You know, I sent out a lot of the emails, and you know, I just want to thank everyone for making this one of the biggest events that we've actually had on Zoom so far. You know, and we are excited to have such a great panel a panelist with you today. And you know, at the end of the day, you know, I'm really even looking excited, you know, looking forward to today and everything that we've been talking about, and you know, in what we have for everybody to you know, to hear. At the end of the day, it's a couple of things I want to talk about. You know, to this point, we've been on Zoom for quite a while, and I really appreciate everybody's, you know, patience and being on Zoom. And you know, I know it's not the best when it comes to networking and all that kind of stuff. And that's what half of our chapter is about, is really networking and getting to know each other. And we assure you that our Q4 meeting, our holiday social, will be our first back in session. So we are really looking forward to it. The board with Brad and Di and myself and Doug, and we're all really trying to put together one heck of a, you know, a great holiday social for you guys once again, you know, as a thank you for 2 years of just putting up with us on Zoom and being there, and just being, you know, at the end of the day, you know, just taking, you know, it all in. And you know, we really look forward to this. I just, you know, I'm sorry, it just you know, for so long as a chapter president, you know, I've had to go, you know, in on Zoom. It's not who I am. I'm one who I love to be in person, and most of the panelists and Jason and most of you guys know that I'm one who loves to touchy feely. So you know, I'm so excited to be back into the, you know, the you know, back in person this holiday social. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Jason. You know, I did introduce our board, as I always do. Jason, Brad, Di, Doug, you know, we're all here for you. But Jason's going to go ahead and give a shout out to all of our panelists, and we're going to go ahead and get started with everything that we have for today.
Sure. And to a couple of housekeeping items of note. First of all, AFCOM, our chapter here in Southern California, we're a not-for-profit organization. So we're focused on promoting an ecosystem of communication between IT operations and the data center operations teams. And so again, we're vendor agnostic in this whole process. And other thing to keep a note here is that we do record these sessions, and these sessions will be available on both our website and our LinkedIn page. When we go between the questions with our panelists, I will pause for 2-3 seconds to kind of leave room for editing. So I apologize, there might be a little bit of awkward silence there, but that's kind of what we're doing. So if I'm going to go on from here, let's see, if I go to, we just talked about that. We're going to talk about the Southwest US data center market. Let me introduce our panelists. And why don't we start going counterclockwise and start with Fred, upper right hand.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Fred Holloway, and I manage the enterprise sales team at CyrusOne. It's a pleasure to spend time with you this afternoon. Thanks, Jason.
Phil?
Hi, Phil Lawson-Shanks. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Aligned Data Centers. And again, very pleased to be with you all today.
Shannon?
Hi, I'm Shannon Bishel. I'm a Senior Account Manager at Switch and super excited to be with the AFCOM team today.
Thank you. Derek?
Hi, Derek Seiler. I'm a Principal Solution Architect with Flexential, and likewise excited to be on the panel.
And Brian?
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Tasker. I'm a Sales Director here at Megaport, and thanks for having me on this panel, Jason.
Thanks. And I'm the lower right-hand guy. I'm Jason Shepard. I'm on the board of the AFCOM Southern California chapter. My day job, I'm a location analyst and a site selection specialist for data centers at Cresa. So anyway, so moving on from here, what we're going to do is, if you haven't attended an AFCOM Southern California chapter event, what we always do is we have the introductions at the beginning, and then we set kind of like set the baseline, some of the stats, some of the trends that are going on right now, which might stoke some topics of interest and discussion for our panelists. And then we're gonna have an open dialogue on some of the topics of interest. So first and foremost, AFCOM, Southern California chapter. It's the largest AFCOM chapter by region in the country. And so we're literally going from the San Diego, Mexico border all the way up through Orange County, Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, out to the Nevada and Arizona borders. Why I want to mention this is we have 25 million in population in Southern California. The corporate headquarters facilities here, they're not the hyperscalers. It's traditional brick and mortar companies that obviously people kind of know us from the media industry. Well, the media industry only make up 4% of the actual companies, but they're also some of the largest that are out there, right? And there are all the offshoots off of that. Well, the data center providers that we have presenting with us here today, they're catering their data center solutions to a lot of our customers here in region. And the reason why I say this, again, it's memory is that, again, this is what we call enterprise. There are three types of data centers. There's corporate America, we call enterprise data centers. The second category, the internet data centers, are hyperscalers, right? The Facebooks, the Googles of the world, right? And the last category, we call them 3POs, third-party operators. Wholesale colocation as a base, might lease to a retail colocation provider, who might have a managed services provider or a cloud provider as a client, who might have that enterprise user as a client, right? So that's stacking plan, right? Every step of the way. Three different types. Our users here in Southern California are really that enterprise contingent. Another thing I wanted to illustrate here before we kind of get started, and this is one of the things that we were talking about in panel preparation for this discussion, was why are these users out of California providing services to Southern California? If you look at the power rates analysis that we've included here on the screen for you today, if we just took a 500 kilowatt user at a 50% load, remember we talked about utilization under 50%, right? If we're talking about a 50% load at 500 kW, every 1 cent per kilowatt hour at a 1.5 PUE equals $32,000 a year in electricity bill. Well, guess what? If I've got that 500 kilowatt user in Los Angeles, LADWP, 17.8 cents a kilowatt hour, my annual electricity bill is $586,000, right? If I move that to a marketplace, I'm not going to say Nevada or Arizona, I'm just going to go right in the middle and say 7 cents a kilowatt hour. That annual electricity bill is $230,000 a year. So for just that 500 kilowatt user, you're saving the delta between 230 and 586,000, right? So that's a significant cost savings. So what is not really a gigantic data center, okay? So that's it. That's why we're seeing, hey, why are these users going to those different markets? And we're going to have our panelists speak about that in a little bit. The other thing we need to take in consideration is the round trip latency in these different markets from Los Angeles. And so what I went back through is I went back through CenturyLink, now Lumen. I went back through the latency charts. And I said, what are the round trip latencies between Los Angeles and these different markets? Well, LA to the Silicon Valley on CenturyLink ranges between 7.7 to 8 milliseconds. To Rancho Bernardo, Sacramento, it's 11.5 milliseconds. San Diego's 3. But to Phoenix, it's between 10 to 10.5. Tucson's 12 milliseconds. Nevada, Las Vegas is between 7 to 15. By the way, that sounds like a long range, 7 to 15. Well, if you look at the map, it depends on if you're going out following the routes I-15, or if you're actually going down I-10 to the border and then going up, right? That's why those latencies are different with the same provider, because it depends on whose network are you, whose fiber long haul are you riding on. And then also look at markets like Salt Lake City. So I know on AT&T's backbone, LA to Salt Lake City back is about 18 milliseconds. LA to Denver back is about 30 milliseconds. So as a corporate tenant rep site selection guy for data centers, I've had my clients, a typical corporate maximum latency might have been 30 milliseconds round trip latency. So no matter how many incentives Omaha would throw at me at 44 milliseconds from LA, I just couldn't go. You're outside of my latency threshold. So you start looking at what are the primary markets servicing the Southern California marketplace. Well, historically, it's Phoenix and Las Vegas, right? But we've also seen a lot of expansion into markets like Salt Lake City. There's some in Denver too. But that's a little bit of background as far as what you're looking at from a round trip latency standpoint. The other thing I want to address is, and we do an annual colocation survey. So this was the year-end 2001 survey that we basically do in the first quarter of the year, right? As far as a look back. And most of the providers that are on the call today replied to this survey. So without naming names, who said what I wanted to be able to point out here is that, and again, in another slide, I'm going to talk about being at the DCD conference earlier this week in Silicon Valley. Not everybody uses the same level of capacity that a hyperscaler, Amazon or Facebook uses inside of a colocation facility. A lot of our corporate users, and again, I can have the panelists jump in when we start there, but typical maybe 30 amp 2.8 volt circuits, still 5 kW per cabinet, might be a slight uptick there, but in reality, that's completely different from the hyperscalers using that large density per cabinet. The other thing I want to be able to point back to, which was, again, that average customer utilization of contracted capacity is right now about 48%, but based upon our survey, that's a slight uptick from 46% in our last survey. But other things that I had asked in our survey, and again, I'm going to move on from this slide right away, but just point out is we basically asked each of the different colo providers what were the emerging trends that they were seeing. This is very noisy. So what I did was I pulled out what were really the top 5 most noted by those different colo providers. The first one that all of them, well, all but 2 mentioned was the concept of cloud repatriation, right? So there was that concept right now of CIOs saying, we're going 100% to the cloud, right? Whoa, that was really expensive, right? And so we're going to pull back a little bit, right? And so stabilized loads might be coming back, and there are different components of applications that may be coming back. However, they're not going away from cloud. It's just more of a right sizing, right? It's just a counter steering. The other named comment was it's really a seller's market. Right now, the colocation market is very, very strong, and there's a reason for that. And it's rapid expansion by cloud providers to the point where the capacity is becoming more limited, if that makes sense. The other thing was everybody talked about, I asked the same question of every single colo provider, are hybrid colocation solutions available to customers within your facility? What does that mean? Do my clients have the ability to be able to cross-connect to cloud solutions within the walls of the data center? Every single provider replied yes. And then supply chain is hurting everybody. There was a lot of discussion about that at DCD up in Silicon Valley this week. And then there was flexible terms and shorter contracts. This was the overview of Data Center Dynamics Conference up in the Silicon Valley Monday, Tuesday this week. I came back yesterday. What you'll notice here is on the left-hand side, these were all of the actual specific sessions, the titles of each of the actual sessions. The first day were actual specific large panel breakout sessions. The second day were 15-minute interviews in the main data center hall. Okay, so slightly different format. The second day of note, I highlighted everything that dealt with either green, sustainability, or carbon neutrality. And 50% of all the sessions the second day dealt with carbon neutrality, green, or sustainability. So it's just something that is really at the top of mind. And I know something that Phil will talk about on our call here today. But some of the things I really kind of pointed out on the right-hand side, which is the rapid expansion of data center operators right now across the country. And one of the major cloud providers, without naming names, was on stage, and they specifically said, look, we're shifting away from owning our own data center facilities into leasing data center capacity. And with that, they're gobbling up space in different markets around the country, around the world. And they said, well, look, there's not just this infinite amount of land. If you look at vacancy rates right here in Southern California, you're under 2-3% in certain segments, right? So it's not easy to find that capacity. One of the other providers said, like, look, when you're looking at these data center site selection considerations, when you go to these different markets, you can always create more renewable energy, like Switch had done there in the Greater Las Vegas marketplace. What you can't get is power. I mean, you can't get water, excuse me, right? You just can't recreate water like you can create renewable energy. And then there are also a lot of buzzwords that are going around, like digital twin. They say it's essential now. And one of the other Colo providers there on stage had said, look, if you need a megawatt today, because of this rapid expansion by providers, if you need a megawatt today, but you're only using 100 kW, you need to commit to the 1 megawatt now, or it may not be available to you downstream. So yeah, as a user, as an enterprise user, that's a big pill to swallow, right? With a fixed IT budget, right? So just things to take in consideration. So with that said, one more thing on the left-hand side, the impact of hyperscale demand is having its impact on the enterprise consumer, right? You're getting to these data center facilities where the rates are going up because there's just no space left. And it's not just space, but capacity. So that said, these are the questions that we're going to pose to our panelists today. First one, which is, hey, just definitions of buzzwords. The second one, really kind of, there's an article, I'm sure that many people that read Fortune magazine saw the article. I sent it to all my panelists, right? Saying that data centers are dinosaurs, right? And they looked at kind of declining profitability of a few different providers. But what does that mean? And is that truly the case relative to the data center industry? And then I want to ask our different providers what the advantages of their markets are to Southern California-based users. And then the typical, I'm going to Brian Tasker from Megaport talk about cloud onboarding and some advantages there. And that ties back into hybrid colocation. And then we're going to close the day with emerging trends that our data center providers are seeing. So with that being said, I'm going to pause for a second so we can edit. Okay, so our first question of the day is for our panelists. What are some of the definitions of and buzzwords that you guys are hearing today? So for example, we've heard about digital twins, right? What does that mean? What does edge mean to you? So I guess I'll throw that up if anybody wants to take a shot of buzzwords that they're hearing today and what that might consist of.
Well, this is Derek. I guess I'll break the ice and go first. So I think some of the buzzwords that we hear quite a bit at Flexential, because we're a provider of retail colocation, wholesale colocation services, right? So a lot of the things, Jason, you were talking about that are drivers of this, right? Whether that's the social media companies or the hyperscalers sort of gobbling up all of this capacity. If you're in the wholesale colocation business, as all your panelists here are, or connecting them to cloud platforms like Megaport.
But by the way, Derek, just real quick, basic definition for some of our younger younger in the business, meaning IT teams that may not understand what's the fundamental difference between retail versus wholesale.
Sure, and I bet all of our panelists will probably have a slightly different take on that. But retail colocation for us is typically deployments and maybe 100 kW or less. Wholesale colocation, you're getting up into the megawatt range, and we're seeing all the same dynamics that you were referring to, Jason, when it talks to ROFR or right or first refusal right, gobble it up now, because with the way that the hyperscalers are driving a lot of the absorption in market, we can't make that guarantee, later on down the contract that capacity is going to be available. But shifting real quick, just to ones that we see quite a bit are around repatriation and hybrid. So I'm interested in the rest of the panelists' commentary on that article. I did read it in advance of this. As far as data center debt, I certainly not for folks that are in the business of deploying wholesale colocation and hybrid multi-cloud. I think multi-cloud and hybrid models are the new normal for a lot of folks in our business. They're looking for network-rich facilities to establish a beachhead into, and then expand out into other cloud platforms, and ultimately trying to kind of level load their platforms around choosing the right infrastructure for the right workload. So we're having conversations with customers around what should your deployments be in a public cloud. We'll provide you the connectivity to get there. What should be potentially deployed in a colocation environment, and what should be in a managed private cloud environment. And there's situations where all three of those would apply optimally.
Yeah, for us, Jason, what we're hearing people talking about is a concept of cloud adjacency. It's such a dynamic space. I don't know that, some people talk about, well, they didn't get it right. Well, no, I don't think you're ever going to get it right, or it's never going to be stable. You're always going to be looking for where where do you optimize your workloads? Where do you optimize the performance of what you have running across your platforms? And so what we try to do is say, come join the party, and you can take advantage of whatever platforms are available, and they're just a cross connect away, right? So the idea of being adjacent to however your customers want to leverage or they want to run their workloads is really the conversation that we're having day in and day out. And I'm sure I'm not alone there. It's very similar to what Derek was just describing.
Shannon or Phil, any buzzwords that are coming up these days that maybe you weren't hearing a few years ago?
Sorry, it took me a second to get unmuted. Phil, if I cut you off, you're more than welcome to jump in, but definitely agree with Derek and Fred on all accounts. I think we're also hearing a lot about uptime, 100% uptime. And I know that's not a buzzword, but it's important, especially in, mission critical data that you have running in the data center that you have it in, whether you're, half cabinet, hundreds of cabinets, it all makes monetary sense that you need to have that 100% uptime. And that's not always stable in markets where maybe power's not stable or cooling's not stable. So that's really important for us to provide as well.
I would agree. And I think we're hearing a lot about digital twin and sustainability. And I think digital twin, it means a lot of different things to different people. So it's almost like, what does edge mean? And I have a particular version of opinion of edge, which I can talk about. But we've been doing digital twin. I always hesitate to use that term, but we've been collecting all the data, all the points from all our systems and placing those in a data lake so that we can run analytics on those at any given time. So not only the day-to-day monitoring, but also historical data where we can assign weather patterns, and we can look at how a particular customer's load operated on a particular set of environments. So when they ask us to build for them again in a different location, we can then take that and extrapolate that data set onto our cooling infrastructure and see how that will perform in a different region based on average weather patterns. Although, given what's happening with weather patterns today, it's really hard to predict weather patterns based on what happened before. So, but digital twin, it's another thing that people are really talking about, and lots of software companies are coming up saying they've got the digital twin, whether it's a virtual tour, whether it's a point cloud you've scanned and you can go through VR goggles or augmented reality. But to my mind, and we do all of that as well, they're great for our construction teams and also for our marketing teams and for selling. But to my mind, a digital twin is actually looking at the raw data of what's happening in the four walls and in the yard relative to the load that's being placed on it by the clients and the environmentals on the outside.
Brian, did you want to chime in on any of those buzzwords? Or because I can actually give what I think is a definition of retail versus wholesale colocation as well.
I'll just briefly touch on the importance of the TLA in our industry, which means the importance of the 3-letter acronym. So as we get through buzzwords, if it doesn't have 3 letters in the acronym, it needs to be rated again. Yeah. So, but I'll let you move on to the next one, Jason.
Well, yeah, no, so the one thing I would say is for our users, from a retail colocation versus wholesale colocation standpoint, we use a lot of metaphors and similes to kind of help bridge the gap between IT and corporate real estate departments, right? And so I've always looked at retail colocation. Obviously, it's like not everybody builds their own office building. They lease a suite inside of an office building, right? So when you go down to a colocation facility, if you have separately metered power consumption, right? That's what we often refer to as wholesale colocation. All-in type deals, or we call it retail colocation. So sometimes the corporate real estate team gets a little bit thrown off by that. We're like, well, if I've already paid for my power, doesn't does that include my electricity? Well, no, not necessarily. So I'll use the analogy of flying into the airport and you go to the Hertz counter and they say, well, Mr. Holloway, would you like to prepay for your gas for the convenience of not stopping by Chevron on the way back, right? Well, that's retail colocation, right? So it's an all-in type of a deal. Wholesale, and we're seeing wholesale colocation deals done as low as 100 kW these days. It used to be that 500 kW mark, but I'm getting those deals as low as 100 kW. And for our clients that have that need to manage, they can manage, they don't have those heavy loads, that's certainly more palatable for them. But there's also the convenience of knowing an all-in deal can work for clients as well too. So I'm going to pause before the next question here. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The Fortune magazine article that came out talking about data centers are dinosaurs, right? And what this article is talking about is declining profitability from a few different providers, and you can read it at your leisure. What I found of interest to this, though, is they're referring to the growth of cloud providers, and what the growth of those cloud providers. So, for instance, they quote the fact that Amazon in 2015, Amazon leased 72% of their facilities, but in 2021 that had reduced to 54%. And their own facilities in 2015 was 28%, but now it's 46%. So in my mind, okay, well, they're not doing 2-3 year leases on these gigantic 30 megawatt type facilities, right? So the chances are they haven't moved out of the wholesale colocation facilities that they're in partnership with. To me, this is more of a reflection of expansion and growth, right? Impacting the colocation marketplace versus a reduction of space, if that makes sense. And so what I'd like to ask our panelists here is, again, I have no issues with the article and the authors doing this. It's just more a reflection of what are your thoughts? What is the strength of the colocation marketplace today? Is it strong? Is it weak?
I'll go ahead.
Go ahead, Shannon.
I'm just going to say, I would say from our point of view, it's completely the opposite. Yes, enterprise legacy dinosaurs maybe, but hyperscale, like we're doing and other data centers are doing, we can't literally build fast enough. I just got back from Atlanta last night visiting our newest pad that's being built there. And we're building on all of our campuses simultaneously right now. And I know a lot of other data centers are in the same boat. You have to meet demand. In order to meet demand, we got to have the space, we got to have the cooling, we have to have everything needed, but we also need to run as optimally as possible. So that having those modular components that allow us to be sustainable and allow us to have 100% uptime in order to meet those needs. I mean, we can't operate a data center without a cloud environment either, right? They got to run hand in hand. They work together.
This is unprecedented demand. We've never seen it like this before. our business is transforming. We're almost a 50-50 split between enterprise and hyperscale cloud. It's a little in the cloud favor, about 55-45%. But to Shannon's point, we literally are it's so difficult to stay ahead of demand. And things like land banking and trying to figure out where to place the next bet. You almost don't have to worry about that anymore. Like, you just keep placing the bets. There's so much demand out there, and there seems to also be more flexibility on location. Companies do seem to have locations where they want to be, but if they can't find the supply right there, it doesn't have to be right there. They'll get into the latency conversations, et cetera, and they're finding that they can actually withstand a little bit more latency to support the workload. So we've never seen it like this.
Yeah, I would say the same, right? I think that the hyperscalers, the social media platforms, the chip manufacturers, I mean, there's a few dozen kind of key strategic accounts that are just driving a huge absorption in the wholesale colocation market. If there's softness, it might be in the traditional retail colocation market, but if you're in the private cloud business as well, you're basically seeing dollars shifting. You're not seeing dollars going away, right? Because those are the the workloads that are typically moving over more into a private cloud, which ends up making you stickier with the account as well. And I'll just echo, I think it was Fred's comment about being willing to look kind of into some other markets. I think a great driver in the Southwest is DR or second site use cases, right? Because just from a geographic perspective, in a risk perspective, that's one of the areas of the country that has sort of the fewest risk from a natural disaster point of view, right? So a lot of folks are looking at the the Las Vegas, the Phoenix, the Salt Lake Cities, in other markets where Flexential has presence in, as a way to kind of replicate that critical data, out of the California market space, NorCal, SoCal, and into a very safe zone from a recovery perspective.
Just to add, I think one of the biggest challenges is getting access to capital. And if you're a publicly held company, getting access to the game's gotten so much bigger that getting access to the kind of capital that you need in order to support the investments that are required, it's just difficult. You're either diluting shareholder value, or you're going to the market for debt that the public markets will not be that thrilled about. So that's one of the bigger issues, and maybe that's where the author was going with the article. But it's just a much bigger game than it's ever been.
Well, it's important to note that the article, from what I've read most of it at that point, right? But most of them are taking quotes from 10Ks, right? Annual published reports versus interviews with the actual, like when I do my annual data center survey, and you all know this, I'm not calling the marketing department. I'm talking to the people I'm doing deals with, right? At your various organizations. That's where I'm getting my data. And that's what I trust, right? So with that said, I don't want to make sure we're watching the clock here. But one thing I will also say is that down in the Q&A sessions, Brad from our board is watching the Q&A at the bottom. And when we're done at the end, we're reserving time for Q&A, and Brad's going to filter up what are the most relevant, important questions so we can make sure we address to our panelists. We're going to pause here for a second before our next question. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this at the very beginning in the advantages of being outside of California for corporate data centers. And we're a little bit different from a chapter than most others in that we are a higher size of zone risk. We are a higher cost of operations marketplace, not only from a standpoint of power, but also from the cost of real estate. To the point where most of our followers here in Southern California are on the IT side of the floor, right? Versus the data center side of the actual house. So we have a lot more colocation demands out there than probably any other region in the actual country. That said, What I want to ask our panelists, again, with their data centers in Phoenix and Salt Lake City and Nevada and Reno, right? Why your markets? What are the advantages of the markets that you're in relative to customers in California? And by the way, this is not meant to be a sales competition between each. What I'm talking about, the advantages of the markets that you're in for servicing our customer, our client base.
Well, I'll jump in there. So Phoenix has been a fantastic market for Arizona in particular, but Phoenix, it's seismically stable, great power, a lot of renewable energy availability for us. And that's key for us. All our energy is renewable. There's a really strong workforce from even before data centers were really a growth market, going way back to 2010, 2012. A lot of call centers there, so a highly educated workforce, very business savvy, good tax concessions. So that's always been a good place. And after 2013, 2014, when the network started to get built in, it just became a boom time for us and for others. And Salt Lake for us, we went there the behest of a client who wanted to work with a hyperscaler to have a core node placed outside of California for tax reasons, and also for DR reasons, but didn't want to be anywhere else like Nevada or something. They chose that region for us. So we worked very carefully and diligently with the local municipalities and the council to negotiate sales compensation, sales tax breaks for our clients. So again, that shifted that whole marketplace again. And again, network was there. NSA had built a big data center structure there, brought a lot of network connectivity in. So that's how these things always work. You go where the client wants to go. There has to be good network. And if network isn't there, then if they're big enough, it's going to get trenched into place.
Yeah, I would concur with what Phil has said. We have found that the evolution of the network in Phoenix has been a big plus for us. It's also one of the healthiest combinations of very large hyperscale and large enterprise at scale, along with what we've been talking about with regard to retail colocation. It's been such a healthy mix there, and the cross-pollination for our enterprise clients of being able to take advantage of some of the cloud opportunities on our campus that happens to be in Chandler, Arizona, just southeast of Phoenix, has just been fantastic.
I would echo both of those comments. Obviously, for Nevada, we have our campus in Las Vegas and Reno. As you already talked about, low latency between LA and Northern California has been immense, low tax structure. We also have a 2% sales and use tax abatement that's huge for clients, and that's a big material savings for anybody. Phil mentioned that also, but it's something that when you put dollars to cents, procurement departments love that, as well as having the 100% uptime, the physical security, and just being a really easy to get to place, right? That's going to be important for clients who are not located in Nevada. Only about 5% of our clients that are co-located in Nevada actually reside in Nevada. So super important that we have that. And it just gives, the cost optimization as far as being close and having that latency and cross connections to public and private on-ramps on our campus. So that makes a huge difference, having that low latency.
Derek, do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I would just echo what the rest of the panelists said, right? I think it's, the lower cost of land, the lower cost of power, that's driving a lot of it out. The DR component of it as well is driving a lot of it. We've just seen kind of a willingness for customers to kind of look outside of their borders. And I think a lot of it too is just new data center builds, particularly in the Northern California market. If they're going in typical, 10 to 12 megawatt capacity, the kind of deals, we're seeing right now, and I'm sure all the other panelists are probably the same, are just much larger than that, right? So there's just larger facilities that are kind of going into, the Phoenix area and other hyper growth markets to sort of handle the megawatts of capacity that some of these hyperscalers and social media platforms are asking for.
We're going to pause here for a second before our next question. want to bring in Brian Tasker from Megaport. One of the things that we've been talking about, well, again, it really is a hybrid world today, right? And so I've had clients of ours saying, we're going to the cloud, right? And it's like, okay, well, it's not the cloud, it's cloud, right? And whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, right? And so it's a hybrid world today. And so when I'm working with clients and we're evaluating options in different markets across the country, they almost always want to know, is there an ecosystem of cloud solutions operating within the walls of that data center facility that we can cross connect to? So instead of having each one of my point-to-point 10 gig connections, $2,000, $2,500 a piece, whatever it ends up being, and I've got, let's say I got 5, 6, or 7 of those, well, it adds up really quick. Well, if I can mitigate that by being in a facility where there is that ecosystem, or if there's an onboarder, right, that adds value to the equation. So Brian with Megaport, Brian, can you first of all give an overview as far as what Megaport is and what you guys do? And we could talk about the value that you add to the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jason. So really, if you think about it, we touched on it a little bit earlier, where cloud deployments have physical, on-ramps within data centers. Chandler was brought up as a one on-ramp for, Oracle, for example. Different data centers have these on-ramps, but there's also a whole lot more data centers out there that don't. So, a company like a Megaport saw the gap to deploy our gear in, a great lot of data centers, connect them all together, including the ones with the cloud on-ramps. So it really, what's really happened now is it's really opened up the selection choices of data centers for clients to choose and have access to any cloud they want, because essentially across connect into Megaport, they can access Chandler, 350 Cermak, switch in Las Vegas, access all those clouds they want with just a cross connect or two in the facility that they choose. So it's really, it's almost, if you think about it, it's almost like kind of flattened the landscape there. It's kind of torn down the four walls of just, you have to be in a certain data center to access this cloud in this region. And for that, I think we've, companies like Megaport, I think have really helped the general cloud adoption of enterprise over the last 5-6 years. I mean, I've seen a tremendous uptick but Jason, yeah, that's the quick overview.
And I'm glad you chose those specific words too, because with clients, when they say we're moving to cloud, well, are you abandoning all your older solutions? I mean, your old operating platforms, or are you adopting cloud? And so I really appreciate the way that you put that. Do you have any metrics relative to the actual number of different cloud providers the typical enterprise user actually uses within a Colo facility?
So I did some digging, and I did pull up our that Flexera State of the Cloud report. It showed it did like a survey that kind of broke down one segment for 1,000 plus employee enterprises, and of that, asked them their cloud strategy, and 93% cited a multi-cloud strategy, which was tremendous. And of that 93%, the breakdown was 87% of that was hybrid cloud. So, having a data center footprint and then extending that data center essentially into the cloud, which is what my day-to-day I see quite often. As far as number of clouds, multi-cloud, definitely, minimum of 2. I think multi-cloud kind of gets confused a little bit. Even if someone is using a cloud today, there is always the uncertainty that they're going to get a phone call or an email that says, hey, get me into GCP as well. I read an article, it looks good, let's do it. It's going to happen, right? You can't plan the next 3 years and say, I'm going to have this exclusive cloud provider, because you never know what's going to happen next week. So even multi-cloud, I think, also kind of speaks to the ability to add a quick connections to other clouds, because you're not basing your entire budgets on a single cloud provider.
So if you're going to share a secret with just us here on the call, nobody else, right? If we're negotiating contracts, how many how many cross connects should our clients reasonably looking for to include in their SLAs? And Shannon, I'm going to held this to you specifically, right? No, kidding. But what is typically the number of cross connects that a user can really expect before they start getting charged?
I guess within the data center, I mean, I'll answer to the best of my knowledge here. So typically, the typical deployment with, I guess, to clients that connect to Megaport, they typically hand me 2 cross connects, and then from there we send off, 3 or 4 or 5 plus connections to the cloud providers. That's what I see on a typical deployment. It seems to be a best practice. 2 connections go to 2 separate routers on their side, and the types of, the type of attitude, I think, of a typical customer that goes into a data center, they value diversity, they value redundancy. They don't like single threaded designs. Another point I wanted to bring up during this little time here was cloud on-ramps in the data center are very cool. If you have that available to you, that is a good thing. But the type of client that is in that data center, they also don't want to be limited to that one entry point into that cloud, because those on-ramps do go down sometimes and they usually make the news. So another great reason to have, like a provider like a Megaport, they can extend you outside of those 4 walls. If there is an issue, you have a way to stay up and be in a region right adjacent to you and not be closed out while your neighbors in the cage next to you may be down and are pounding the phones trying to figure out how they're going to be back up.
Well, and I know we've been talking for a while, but can you just make sure let's repeat that, right? So if you're in a facility, any one of our Colo providers on the call here today, whose facilities that you're in, and by the way, I know that Aligned has another onboarding partner as well. But so if you're in that facility and that region is down for that availability zone, however, you have a packet fabric connection because you're in another Colo facility that has packet fabric, that has Megaport, you will stay up in that zone?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So the way to think about it is the cloud itself is not down, right? There's just the entry point. So the front door that you were using for the last couple of years, all of a sudden just got closed. The cloud is still there. But if you had another access point, so another virtual connection into that same cloud, but just a different data center, it could be a different data center, like for the example of Ashburn and Reston, Virginia. You can be in one of those sites and have connections into both of them into cloud on-ramps. So if one of your doors is closed, you have the other one open to you. So you're able to shift the routing on your side, or just even create something on demand as another backup strategy.
Great.
Yeah, Brian, I hear a lot of our customers that are doing, they've got diverse access to Megaport, but then once they're in, they're able to manage their virtual cross connects into the various cloud platforms. I mean, you provide a ton of flexibility as well as the diverse routes. But I mean, the flexibility to be able to move across platforms, and if I understand correctly, even manage across the platforms by utilizing Megaport. I mean, you provide customers just a tremendous amount of flexibility to operate.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's really, this type of business has really brought the kind of the traditionally rigid networking economics and mapped them more towards the flexibility of the cloud-based consumption model, which is really, I think, has really been embraced by the market, and it's just quickly becoming the new norm. I think, Jason, earlier on, you mentioned something, in a previous call we had together, short terms, flexibility, those types of talking points. So this is what this is.
Well, and by the way, it's that question, this question, all both tied together, which was the advantages of hybrid colocation. So it's really, I think, almost like one and the same, right? But again, it's I guess we'll briefly, because we only have 10 minutes left in the scheduled time. If we can stay over, we can stay over. But trying to keep this short. How important is, and I'll ask each of the colocation providers here to comment, how important is hybrid colocation today?
Well, I'll jump in. It's vital Because I mean, you talked about repatriation. It's not really repatriation, it's right sizing, as you said. And it's the ability to put the workloads where they should be. There's also the other element of the hardware manufacturers now providing servers as a service, like HP GreenLake, for example, and Dell do a similar thing. So it changes the economic model of how you manage your workloads. So there are some workloads that work very well in a colo. Some can burst out to many different cloud providers, but you do need that ability. And also, you know, like Megaport, PagaFabric, to be able to have a virtual cross connect across the country, so you can have that DR or have that site-to-site replication. It's just a different world now. Latency is still somewhat of an issue, but new optics have changed that. Next generation software-defined network services like Megaport, like PagaFabric, like Console Connect, all these new technologies. Well, they're not so new anymore. Megaport, you've been around a long time, got many, many ports of presence, but that's just enabled our clients to put their workloads where they should be, which are more economical. Maybe it's a power thing, maybe it's a cost thing, maybe it's an adjacency, but it's just things are right sizing.
Yeah, I'll maybe go next then. I likewise, I'd say it's absolutely vital, right? We have a saying as we're doing discoveries and workshops to, you know, let the workload be the guide, right? So, you know, whether it's UCaaS, CCaaS, you know, that's moved over to, you know, the SaaS model, right? Their containers and development teams are working in the hyperscalers with all the microservices that, you know, that provides. Their line of business, you know, databases and ERP applications, those are likely going to be in colocation or private cloud deployment. Guess what? I just named 3 clouds right there, right? So it's absolutely, you know, the ability to, you know, kind of have that infrastructure as utility and that network as utility in order to, you know, kind of plug into the right sort of infrastructure platform for those workloads.
And by the way, I think it's also important to note that not all data centers are designed and built the same, and not all data centers have this access to the same ecosystem. And at least in my clients' minds, it's a gating issue. These are table stakes. If you don't have it, you're not necessarily going to. Doesn't mean you're completely out, but it's you're fighting with one hand behind your back, right? Maybe both hands behind your back. So anyway, we only have a few minutes left. I'm going to pause for one moment here. As we wrap out the session here, before we get to some Q&A, we'd like to kind of hear from each of our panelists. What we've already talked about some of the emerging trends, right? What are probably the top 1 or 2 emerging trends that you're seeing now that you didn't see even a year ago?
I can go. It's really based on, because of capacity, we are seeing clients sign now before we even have a place built. So they're planning ahead. They know they need X amount of megawatts, or they need X amount of cabinets, and they want to know it's there when they need it. So we're seeing that trend right now. And a year ago, you probably wouldn't have seen that, but that's just based on demand, whether it be power, cooling, space, just having it available when they need it.
Yes, and I'll just add to that, Shannon, what we're seeing is that is forcing the traditional enterprise customers to have to rethink their procurement practices, because look, they need to do their due diligence, absolutely. But if they do the due diligence along their traditional timeline, what they're finding is that space and power is gone by the time they get partway through the process, and that inventory is not there. And it's not just one provider that doesn't have the inventory. What they find is a market could be out, and then they're months at best out from being able to satisfy that demand in that particular.
Well, let me ask you that, because we've all come across, all of us in the service industry, procurement teams, in-house procurement teams, or third-party procurement teams that may not necessarily be all that well versed in the data center industry themselves and the processes that they go through. Are those, I don't want to dissuade a customer from working with one, but is it putting them at a disadvantage if it gets locked in the procurement process for a procurement team that has no experience in the data center side of the business?
Well, I think what we're finding is that many of them are hiring advisors to help them through, and those advisors are in touch with what's going on. Or if there's no advisor involved, they're not just hearing it from one particular player, they're hearing it from the market. And so they're having to bring the rest of their organization in line, or they find themselves potentially empty-handed.
According to the annual survey that we do, 74% of data center colocation data center transactions in the Southwest are completed directly between an IT team and the colocation providers teams, right? Without an advisor. And sometimes that can lead to, and by the way, there's no to over provisioning, and it's not the fault. It's not really, it's a shame on you, colocation provider, right? I think it's a lack of due diligence on the IT teams of not knowing exactly what they need before they come to you. Is that a fair statement, or am I off key?
I think it's up to the colo provider as well to offer the education, because a smaller enterprise client might not fully be aware of everything they need, and not just as it relates to space, but connectivity and things to that nature. So that's our job, is to educate and advocate, right? That's my number one job, is advocating on behalf of clients and potential clients, so that we can make sure we've got the right amount of power allocated to them, and they've requested the right amount at that end state, not just when they start.
Yeah, my consulting partner is a data center architect, and so we start off every project with a data center needs analysis, aligning all the internal stakeholders, so that by the time we come to you all, right, it's a vetted project. And I don't know if all clients do that. So
I'd say for Flexential, it's probably differs by kind of segments of our business, right? So for kind of retail and private cloud, it's going to be very partner driven. Our partner ecosystem is responsible for a large preponderance of our new logo sales pursuits. On the wholesale, it's probably kind of the inverse proportion to that, as the other panelists are suggesting.
Yeah, I would agree. We have our enterprise, our channel partner program brings a lot of large scale enterprise, but the wholesale is still going gangbusters. And to sort of jump onto what someone else said, the buyers are having to shift. We had a hyperscale buyer looking for tens of megawatts in a new building that we built. And they were going through their process, and how they used to do things was it was tens of megawatts. And when they came back and said, right, we're ready to go, we'd actually sold the building. So they're having to wait for the next building to be built. So things are growing at such a pace now, it's crazy. But just to finish off on the emerging trends, we're seeing a huge demand for tracking and monitoring and reporting on embodied carbon. And I think one of your slides came up, Dean Nelson, we were one of the drivers of the whole the accord that's been, the climate accord that we've all signed. And that's something that's really near and dear to us at Aligned, to not only have scope 1, 2, but actually scope 3 reporting, so we can report that on, the carbon in the buildings, the carbon in the MEP, how much iron was in that genset, where it came from, all of that, so we can report all that up.
Yeah, Dean, for people who don't know, Dean Nelson, for infrastructure masons, iMasons, and you can look them up. A lot of great initiatives that they were talking about at the DCD conference. First and foremost, the labeling of individual pieces of infrastructure throughout the corporate data center facility or the intercolocation facilities, data center facilities. It really is it's very, very forward thinking. So what we're going to do now is just the last minute or two here. We're already over time, but want to make sure we get to any really important questions. Brad, were there any notable questions that came in?
Yeah, I've got a couple of them. The first one's for you, Jason. There's a question from Duncan asking what the latency is to Hillsborough, specifically that's in near Portland. If you had latency and then rates in Portland, is that something you have available?
Yeah, I do. If I come up here and I go to search and I go to Oregon. So, well, here's Eugene. Here's Portland. So, Hillsborough. So your round trip latency from LA to Portland is 21.8 milliseconds round trip latency.
Okay. And do you have rates
And I'd have to go look at the actual charts
for utility rates?
Yeah, well, I can bring it up right now, but hold on, give me a second here.
While he's doing that, there's a question for Brian from Megaport. What percentage of customers are leveraging SDN? That question came in from Aaron.
Well, I would say 100% of the Megaport customers are leveraging our software-defined network. I know Aaron, but yeah, the software-defined network, as far as network as a service, is kind of the buzzword around it. It's pre-deployed. We're just slicing off VLANs and slicing off capacity as you request it. So yeah, I mean, one stat I will say, over the last 3 years, Megaport has seen about a 7x increase in multi-cloud. So maybe that's another way to answer that. So our customer base has been moving to connecting to more than one cloud using us.
That rate looks like PG, without looking at it specifically, but for Portland General Electric, there were 6.7 cents a kilowatt hour. But again, you've got, I think some of the teams here might have sites up there. Derek, do you guys have sites up in Portland?
We do. Yeah. We've got a good footprint in the Silicon Forest, as we call it, right? The Pacific Northwest. And yeah, I would concur. About 20-25 milliseconds round trip from a latency perspective, and about 6 cents a kilowatt. Yeah.
Who's your provider there specifically in Hillsborough? Is it Portland? Is it PGE, or who's your provider?
It's PGE. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Brad, what other questions came in?
I got one from Kimberly asking about digital twins. What resources are available in your data centers to address digital twins? And are you doing this yourselves, or do you have partners?
Who wants to take that one?
I'll jump in there quick. So there are lots of applications out there. There are some that are used really by the construction teams, and it bleeds then over into the operations team. Mine's going blank on one of them. There's Six Sigma, and I forget the company that created that. But if you look up Six Sigma building, they have a digital twin portion of that, which is very, very effective. If you're just looking for like a construction, we use OpenSpace, which is a spin out of a couple of Google people from the Google Street Talk sidewalk project, where you have just a very inexpensive 360 camera mounted to a hard hat, and you just walk down and it takes a scan, and then an AI engine associates that with the layout of the building. So you can see as the building goes up, you can go backwards and forwards in time and see how things are going. And then for higher fidelity, there's a Matterport, but that's really difficult to use in large spaces. But a blend of those things where you're doing point clouds, bring those into Revit or into another tool to get that visualization, or just having the data feeds come into something like Six Sigma is very effective.
Okay, that's helpful.
Right, we may have time for maybe one more question. So what the most relevant question is, and then we're going to need to wrap up.
This is the last one. There's a question from Wyatt about panic buying. And are you seeing a lot of people panic buy based upon lead times that we're seeing at this point in time?
I don't know. I'll just take a quick step. I don't know if it's panic buying as much as it is future proofing, and doing a better job of forecasting out that we're seeing. I mean, the phrase panic buying is certainly thrown around a lot, but I think this world that we're living in has forced people to take a longer term view and secure inventory much further out than we'd ever seen before.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Supply chain demands are definitely doing that. As far as when people are trying to deploy, they're waiting for gear to arrive that should have arrived months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we wrap up here, I'd like to kind of close with a couple things. So first of all, number one, to thank you to all of our panelists, Shannon and Fred and Brian, Phil, Derek. You guys are awesome. We really appreciate it. I also want to note that, again, we are a not-for-profit organization focused on promoting that ecosystem of education, right? And so we do rely on our sponsors. And so a lot of the colocation providers, some of which you guys are here on the call today, are sponsors for us. We are going to have our annual holiday social again for the first time since 2019. So we're really excited about that. We look forward to seeing everybody at that time. We are always looking to expand our board. If you're interested in getting involved with our chapter, by all means, send David, I, or anybody on the board email, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say and see what we can all do together. So, without further ado, I'd like to say thank you, everybody, and until our next quarterly meeting, thank you very much, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.